Hello, welcome to the Austin Software Cooperative Meetup. This is August 7th. We are going to be reviewing Technofeudalism, What Killed Capitalism, Yanis Varoufakis, and we're going to be going through chapter 3, the Cloud Capital chapter, and I'm going to dive right in. So, our last chapter, I won't go through too much, was capitalism's metamorphoses. So, all the different forms that it's gone uh, through the past 100 years. And then now we're getting into the cloud capital form. Uh, so starting out at its primitive level, uh, what is a superpower? It's asymmetrical access to scarce resources. That's what creates a superpower. And he, Yanis Varoufakis talked about the different kinds of capital. One of them was the power that comes in capital, not necessarily just the money. You guys let me know if you hear echo. Uh, Here's a kind of a description of the power. So imagine wandering lost in the Sahara Desert on the verge of dying of thirst. I approach you on a camel laden with flasks of water. Suddenly, I have the power to make you volunteer to do things on my behalf. That's kind of just analogy for power within capital. Here's another description and the evolution of the power. So, 3,000 years ago, because the Mycenaeans had iron weapons. Oh, no, sorry. Because the Dorians had the iron weapons and the Mycenaeans lacked it. The Dorians took over the good land. Once they had it, they acquired power of those who had lost it. Until fairly recently, it was that precise combination of land and sophisticated weaponry that decided who did what to who had power, and who had to obey. And that is feudalism, land and sophisticated weaponry. Then something happened. Power decoupled from land and vested itself to a previously unparalleled degree in owners of something called capital. What's capital? It's not money, even though money can buy you capital. In the same way, it can buy you land, gizmos, good publicity. It's not weapons, even though weapons can help you expropriate capital as well as land. Right? Before capitalism, capital was easy to find. To define, it took the form of material goods that were produced specifically for the purpose of producing other goods. It's kind of like what most people think of it now. A steel sword, in this sense, was not capital, since it could produce nothing, nothing. But a steel plow or a fishing rod were typical capital goods, or to rephrase the definition, produce means of production. So he's saying that's what capital used to be. Now, commanding capital. This is going to be a story. It's going to be talking about the difference. Anybody have any comments so far? All right. So this story is going to tease out the difference between, let's say, the power of capital with money, or I just say capital with just money and equipment, and then the power within capital. When capital is defined as power, right? So 1829, Thomas Peel brought a bunch of people to Australia, and he had a bunch of seeds, tools, uh, money, that kind of thing. All right. So he went out there and he failed to bring with him from England capitalism. What? Okay, what's going on? Peel's undoing came when something unexpected happened. His workers abandoned him in mass. They simply moved on, got themselves plots of land in the surrounding area, and went into business for themselves. Hmm. Peel's assumption was that his workers had no option other than waged labor. It was a sound assumption in Britain following the enclosures, the mass privatization of common land that took place from the end of the 18th century onwards. Expelled peasants lacked access to any land. Landless laborers resigning a wage job in Manchester, Liverpool, or Glasgow would simply starve to death. In Western Australia, however, the plentiful land, even allowing for the presence of Australia's indigenous inhabitants, offered them an alternative: resignation and self employment. They didn't have the power. The transition from feudalism to capitalism was, in essence, a shift of the power to command from landowners to owners of capital goods. For that to happen, peasants had to first lose autonomous access to common lands. That's why enclosures in Britain were essential for capitalism's birth. They denied British labor the opportunities Peel's workers discovered in Western Australia. By restricting access to land, the enclosures helped capital to transcend the original productivity enhancing role and to grow exponentially in commanding power. Before long, the worldwide commodification of previously common lands had enabled capital to achieve supremacy in all corners of the globe. With the magnification of capital's commanding power over labor, capital's owners amassed great wealth. As their wealth accumulated, their social power proliferated. They graduated from being employers to agenda setters, wherever big decisions were being made, and soon they could boss everybody around. Any questions so far? Comments, questions? So this is I would say, a counterintuitive slash truth. Uh, I think most people think of capital as money, and he's saying capital, a big part of it is power, not money. An example being, hey, here's a person with money, brought some people over there where people had options, and they said goodbye. And so his capital was not useful. Does anybody disagree with that or have any comments about that? As far as the definition of capital. Okay.
Yeah, but I guess in a sense, the capital is you could still use capital to buy those workers, right? Like, I mean, in a more modern sense, it's like something like that would happen. So you could still sway them to work for you
If you
by
had enough
using
money, yeah. Evidently, this guy had $4.6 million, and these people he brought with him were not rich. They didn't have any money at all. I mean, they were basically serfs or whatever. So they came over and they said goodbye. So I guess what you're saying is, there's enough, um, if there's enough money, then sure you can buy them. And that I would say that that's normally how people would think of capital. It's all about money. So if your option is you make more money over here versus there, then go. But now I would say I'd push back. We know from the book Drive that people are motivated only up until the equivalent of what, about 80,000 ish, 100, probably 100 now, around there, by money. And then after that, they want autonomy, purpose, and mastery. So he could have it, and then it becomes you have to have way more money. in order to bring people over, and they still won't. They would still do this as represents autonomy, I would say, when they left, right? So I think that's a good thing to probably combine those two and talk about the power, or talk about capital as money and the limits of it in the context of drive, and then say, okay, that's why you need to have enclosures. Maybe.
So what
So
you say they're motivated by money? Isn't that really they're motivated by survival, right? It's like that's what it is. It's not like, oh, I want money. It's like, no, I want to feed my family. I want to have shelter, right? Is that the case? Because when you define also capital through power, it's also the power to gatekeep and coerce people into a point in which they are motivated, right, to, I guess, exchange.
yeah, I think they're saying here the minimum was met of these 350 workers was met. They willfully decided to come over to Australia, right? Maybe they were poor in Britain. I don't know. But they they I think that the assumption here is that their minimum was covered with while he with him paying them this out of this 4.6 million, and then after that the profits that he got from trading the agriculture that they developed, right? And so I think that after they started working, this example is about why would they not stay? So their needs were being met with him. So why didn't they stay? One thing is, I guess, the modern, I mean, intuitive way to think about it is he just wasn't paying them enough. And then they said, well, we're going to leave. It's, you could say that, right? And that we're just going to make more money out over here by ourselves. That just seems kind of, I don't know, because I think this example is well studied, but it just seems to me like you're going to have to go a whole year and then have to sell. It's pretty risky, um, in order to make your money versus this guy just paying you. So maybe he was just telling them, hey, I'm not paying you a lot. And they said, well, we'll go over here. And it was a money thing, right? But the author's example is, hey, they didn't have that option to go do their own thing in Britain because all the commons was taken up.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess another way to look at it is, was he paying less than they were getting paid in Britain? But they didn't have any option, but they couldn't do it regardless. But his point being, he was not able to stop them from going to another space. And then his other point is, hey, guess what happened? So coincidentally, everywhere else, the commons were getting sucked up by all of the feudal lords and then new capitalists, basically. And they couldn't do this. Some places where they couldn't do this, capitalism flourished. So worldwide commodification of previously common lands had enabled capital to achieve supremacy. That's his argument. All right. Yeah. So it's interesting thing to follow up on. So he likes to use his analogy with Don Draper from Mad Men. And he's talking about Alexa. So basically, Alexa's grabbing your information and it's transforming you. right? So he has this way of describing Alexa. Basically, first it's grabbing your, I mean, it's the other devices, your phones and all that, but this is just one example. First, it's grabbing your data, then so you're training Alexa, and then it affects you by modifying your behavior in different ways, and then you train it to train it better. So it's like a feedback loop. That's what he's talking about. We did a whole review on the book Surveillance Capitalism, which I believe describes that much more detail. So he's going to go a little bit more. This part here, he drives it home a lot. So at a high level, he talks about technology, and then he talks about you could say the political science or the different other strategies that allow the technology to be a paradigm shift. So, the reason the steam engine changed the world rather than ending up a showpiece in some ruler's landscape garden was the epic raid on the common lands that preceded its invention. The enclosures. So first, the plunder of the common lands made possible by brutal state violence, and only then Watt's splendid technological breakthrough. So he repeatedly talks about the common areas have to be plundered first in order for a technological breakthrough to happen. And he's gonna go start talking about this for internet. So a strikingly similar sequence gave birth to cloud capital. First, the epic ransacking of the internet commons made possible by politicians, and then a sequence of spectacular technological inventions, from Sergey Brin's search engine to the dazzling array of today's AI applications. Let's get into the internet. So the early internet was a capitalism-free zone. If anything, it seemed like an homage to Soviet Gosplan. The State Planning Committee, whose job was to replace the market mechanism, a centrally designed, state-owned, non-commercial network. At the same time, it featured elements of early liberalism, even tributes to what I call anarcho-syndicalism, a network without hierarchy. It relied on horizontal decision making and mutual gift exchange, not market exchange. This is one of those things that it's kind of, I guess, hotly contested. There are books on how the development of the internet was not um, uh, horizontally developed, it was hierarchically developed through different institutions. The academia side, they want to say that they were the ones fighting with each other, debating and developing it. And then you have the DARPA uh, um, narrative, and he's using the DARPA narrative. So basically saying coming out of DARPA, the Pentagon chose centrally to finance the design and construction of a network of decentralized computers. And then that's where it came from. And, whole reason was because of the Cold War. The US government built and owned non-commercial computer network that lay outside capitalist markets and imperatives, but whose purpose was the defense of the capitalist realm. So kind of a ironic development is what his point is. So here's another way to reason about it. The technology and way of reasoning about the internet, you can describe it as a series of protocols. A protocol is a language by which the computers can communicate numbers and text, including the addresses of senders and receivers. Those building the original internet decided on common or open protocols, languages that were available for anyone to use for free. Again, this is I would say, an outsider's view. There are a bunch of insiders' view who they were saying that this was much more complicated than that. But I think it's just roughly true. Talking about TCP/IP, IMAP, SMTP, HTTP. There's a lot of battles going on in all of these technologies. But his point being, we pay not one penny to use these protocols, nor do we suffer advertisements as the indirect price for using them. Like Britain's common lands before the enclosures, they remain free for anyone to use, not unlike Wikipedia, one of few surviving examples of a common-based service that takes huge quantities of work to produce and maintain, but which no owner monetizes. We could have a little critique of that too, but it's not. Any critiques or arguments so far? Somebody else want to have a comment on this description of the internet narrative? Let's go. The new enclosures. All right. I'm going to take a step back because he doesn't talk about enclosures. So I want to say it's John Locke with a modern definition of property. And the definition would be the natural, let's say, land, earth elements, something like that, that you as a person transform. So you kind of imbue it with some rights over it. But the enclosure part is also there. So you have to transform, let's say, the land. So let's say you plant some corn. So you transformed it and you made it more valuable in some way. That's the fruit of your labor. Therefore, you have rights to it. Now, they also added in this enclosure thing. If you enclose it, then it's yours. Kind of like thinking, if you planted like what Johnny Appleseed, you're planting apples and going across the United States. You don't own those apple trees, kind of thing. But if you enclose them and stay around, maintain them, all this, it's kind of yours, property. I think that's John Locke. So that's a modern, like, initial definition of property, and that's where the enclosure thing, I believe, comes from. He keeps talking about it. So before that, it was common lands. Kind of think of like Native Americans and how they thought about the land. It was to be shared. Everybody was thinking like that. So let's get into here. And as with the original enclosures, some form of fence would be necessary to keep the masses out of an important resource. In the 18th century, it was land that the many were denied access to. In the 21st century, it was access to our own identity. Astoundingly, our digital identity belongs neither to us or the state. Strewn across countless privately owned digital realms, it has many owners, none of whom is us. A private bank owns your ID codes and your entire purchasing record. Facebook is intimately familiar with whom and what you like. With every day that passes, some cloud-based corporation whose owners you will never care to know owns another aspect of your identity. And he says he's more worried about he's less worried about what these companies know and far more worried about what they own. I'm kind of worried about both myself. To do anything in what used to be our digital commons, we must now plead with big tech and big finance for the ability to use some of the data about us that they own outright, to wire money to a friend, to subscribe to the New York Times, or to buy socks for your granny using debit card. You now have no option but to give something of yourself in return. It didn't have to be this way, and this is kind of might be counterintuitive, but it didn't have to be this way when the US Pentagon chose to make GPS available to everyone, to turn it over to the digital commons. They granted each of us the right to know our location in real time for free. No questions asked, it was a political decision to do so. So this is a nice little thought experiment. Imagine what you could do if you owned your digital identity, could prove who you are without relying on a combination of bank card and corporation like Uber or Lyft that processes that card and all your subsequent travel data. In the same way, GPS pinpoints where you presently are. You would have the opportunity to broadcast over the internet. My name is George. I'm on the corner of Aristotle and Plato Streets, and I am heading for the airport. Anyone wishing to bid for my ride? In the world of Internet 2, shaped by the new enclosures, you're routinely forced to hand over your identity, and part of the digital realm has been fenced off. Closures enabled the plunder of the digital commons, which drove the incredible rise of cloud capital. So he's saying the internet was a commons, got used to it, then it got enclosed. Same thing with regular land, and it got enclosed. He's comparing the two. Any questions? All right. Now we got cloud capital. He's basically saying, we used to get guided to websites. You had to search algorithms from Google, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, the real singularity, the algorithms ceased to be passive. They began to behave in ways hitherto associated exclusively with persons. They turned into agents. The first was simple algorithms that could adapt their objectives in light of the outcome of the activity. In other words, to reprogram themselves, machine learning. The second leap was replaced with the standard computer hardware with exotic neural networks. Okay, fine. The third and a decisive leap infused neural networks with algorithms capable of reinforcement learning. Okay, this is basically the technology side and saying, hey, it got really powerful. And now we're going to start getting into this feudalism type language. Alexa is no serf. It is rather a piece of cloud-based command capital, right? Command capital being that power instead of just money, which is turning you into a serf with your aid and by means of your unpaid labor in order to further enrich its owners, right? So every time you go online, you're basically reinforcing it. The key is to grasping cloud capital's special nature, as we shall see, is the way it reproduces itself and the power to command. A process that is very different from the one that reproduces hammers, steam engines, so on and so forth. So let's see here. Old school, aided by machines, it was waged workers who produced the stuff that was sold to generate profits, which in turn financed their wages and the production of more machines. That's how capital accumulated and reproduced. Cloud capital, in contrast, can reproduce itself in ways that involve no wage labor. How? By commanding almost the whole humanity to chip into its reproduction for free, right? So while workers have become cloud proles, these workers, we have all become cloud serfs. All right, so it's the beginning. Now let's go into cloud proles. I don't know if you all remember Amazon's Mechanical Turk. This thing used to be all in the news, but it's basically a sweatshop for workers. And let's leave that one alone. This one here. And I think the next one is this markets. This is going to be a big argument of the book that's resaid in a bunch of clips online. So let's try to make it there. Cloud Capital has a far more impressive trick up its sleeve. It can command us to put work directly into its own reproduction, reinforcement, and maintenance. Big tech workers, in contrast, collect less than one. Okay, now this whole thing. Workers employed by General Electric, ExxonMobil, General Motors, or any other major conglomerate collect in salaries and wages approximately 80% of the company's income. This proportion grows larger in smaller firms. Big tech workers, in contrast, collect less than 1% of their firm's revenue. I didn't know that, right? The reason is that paid labor performs only a fraction of the work that big tech relies on. But here, most of the work is performed by billions of people for free. That's his argument. No doubt, under feudalism, serfs toiling away on their ancestral lands would have suffered great hardships, but still found it undesirable, if not unfathomable, to have their way of life taken away from them, their shared culture and traditions still. The harsh reality remained. At the end of the harvest, the landlord would send the sheriff to extract the lion's shares of their produce without paying the serfs a penny for it. So it goes with the billions of unwittingly producing cloud capital. The fact that we do so voluntarily, happily even, does not detract from the fact that we are unpaid manufacturers, cloud serfs, whose daily self directed toil enriches a tiny band of multi billionaires residing mostly in California or Shanghai. Right? Cloud capital's singular achievement, a feat far superior than any of these, is the way it has revolutionized its own reproduction. The true revolution cloud capital has inflicted on humanity is the conversion of billions of us into willing cloud serfs, volunteering to labor for nothing to produce cloud capital for the benefit of its owners. Any questions so far? The next section is the popular quotes. All right. Enter Amazon.com and you have exited capitalism. Despite all the buying and selling that goes on there, you have entered a realm which can't be thought of as a market, not even a digital one. When I say this to people, which I frequently do in lectures and debates, they look at me as they would a madman. But once I start explaining what I mean, their fear for my sanity turns into fear for us all. Imagine the following scene straight out of the science fiction storybook. You are beamed into a full town of people going about their business, trading in gadgets, clothes, shoes, books, songs, games, and movies. At first, everything looks normal until you begin to notice something odd. It turns out that all the shops, indeed every building, belong to a chap called Jeff. He may not own the factories that produce the stuff sold in his shops, but he owns an algorithm that takes a cut for each sale, and he gets to decide what can be sold and what cannot. If that were not all, the scene would evoke an old Western, or if that were all, the scene would evoke an old Western in which a lonesome cowboy rides into a town to discover a podgy strong man owns a saloon bar, a grocery store, post office, railway, bank, naturally the sheriff. Except that isn't all. Jeff owns more than the shops and the public buildings. He also owns the dirt you walk on, the bench you sit on, even the air you breathe. In fact, in this weird town, everything you see is regulated by Jeff's algorithm. You and I may be walking next to each other, our eyes trained on the same direction, but the view provided to us by the algorithm is entirely bespoke, carefully curated according to Jeff's priorities. Everyone navigating their way around Amazon.com except Jeff is wandering in an algorithmically constructed isolation. There is no market town. In fact, it's even worse than a totally monopolized market. There, at least, the buyers can talk to each other, form associations, perhaps organize a consumer boycott to force the monopolist to reduce a price or improve quality. Not so in Jeff's realm, where everything and everyone is intermediated not by the disinterested invisible hand of the market, but by an algorithm that works for Jeff's bottom line and dances exclusively to his tune. If it ain't a capitalist market, what is it? It's a type of digital fief. Under feudalism, the overlord would grant so-called fiefs to subordinates called vassals. These fiefs gave the vassals the formal right to exploit economically a part of the overlord's realm, to plant crops on it, for example, to graze cattle in exchange for a portion of the produce. The overlord would then unleash his sheriff to police the fief's execution and collect what he was owed. Jeff's relationship to the vendors on Amazon.com is not too dissimilar. He grants them cloud-based digital thieves for a fee, and then he leaves his algo sheriff to police and collect. And then he talks about Elon Musk. Why is it that Tesla is so popular? Well, one reason the financiers valued it so much higher than Ford or Toyota is that the car's every circuit is wired into cloud capital, besides giving Tesla the power to switch off one of its cars remotely if the driver fails to pay service. Merely by driving around, Tesla owners are uploading in real time information, what music they're listening to, and that enriches the company's cloud capital. They may not think of themselves as cloud servers, but that's precisely what they are. So it took mind-bending scientific breakthroughs, fantastical sounding neural networks, and imagination-defying AI programs to accomplish what? To turn workers toiling in warehouses, driving cabs, and delivering food into cloud proles. To create a world where markets are increasingly replaced by cloud thieves, and to force businesses into the role of vassals, and to turn all of us into cloud serfs glued to our smartphones, tablets, so on and so forth. Any comment on this? Is it true? What do you think? Everybody disagrees. All right. Amazon is our new overlord. 750. Cloud capital can be thought of as a vast production and behavior modification scheme. It produces marvelous devices and the power for its owners to command humans who do not own it. But that's where the similarity between terrestrial and cloud capital ends, and where the difference between conventional capitalists and cloudalists begin. Cloud capital has arrived. And in one fell swoop is automated both roles. The exercise of capital's power to command workers and consumers alike was handed over to the algorithms. It's a far more revolutionary step than replacing auto workers with industrial robots. The truly historic disruption was to automate capital's power to command people outside of the factory, the shop, or the office, and to turn all of us, cloud proles and everyone else, into cloud serfs in the direct service of cloud capital, unmediated by any market. Conventional capitalist manufacturers increasingly have no option but to sell their goods at the discretion of the cloudalists, paying them a fee for the privilege, developing a relationship with them no different than that of vassals, their feudal overlords. On the one hand, the rise of cloud capital has solidified, augmented, and massively expanded capital's triumph over labor, society, and catastrophically nature. And yet, here's the contradiction. In doing so, cloud capital has simultaneously ushered in the techno-feudal system that has killed capitalism in so many realms and is in the process of replacing it everywhere else. That's the final section. Any questions, comments?